let's talk about my worst books of 2019. You know, it happens. I read a lot of bad books in 2019. It's unavoidable. So, I guess it's time to talk about them. And then hopefully never think about them again. So I did rank them. Number 10 being, I guess, the least bad of my worst books. And then number 1 being the absolute worst book I read this year. So let's get into it. Number 10 was The Bells by Dhonielle Clayton. I wanted to love this book so bad. This book is about a group of girls named the Bells who are able to use their magic, their arcana, to manipulate people's features and just like physical appearance. It's like magic plastic surgery, basically. My problem with this was it felt like the entire book was set up for the second book. It felt like nothing happened. I felt like it talked a lot about who the characters were without really fleshing out who they were, in a way. It felt like there were some half-assed romantic dealings that weren't really fleshed out, and the story just didn't feel like it went anywhere. And I really enjoyed the premise, and I thought about reading the second book because it did get to a point at the end where it was interesting, but then I heard not so great things about the second book, so I was like, what's the point? I'm just not doing this to myself. I didn't enjoy it. I wish I did. It's certainly not the worst book in the world though, so if you liked it, I would still give it a try. Number 9 was Velocity by Dean Koontz. This is the first Dean Koontz book I've ever read, and boy was it a disappointment. This was about a bartender who suddenly starts getting messages about having to choose between 2 different people and who's gonna die and who's gonna live. Holy shit, my cat just scared the crap out of me. God damn it, Gizmo. Okay, it's fine. I like that sort of premise, but this was done just very poorly. The main character really had no personality. The female characters in this were pretty much insulting. There were 2, one who was just like this sexy bimbo, and then another one who was in a coma. And basically her sole purpose was to drive the main character to make choices. It was bad. There was nothing good about it. The ending wasn't that great. It was just a big shrug when I finished it. I was glad it was over. I won't remember a damn thing about it, and it was an all-around kind of blah experience. Coming in at number 8 is The Love Interest by Cale Dietrich. This was about a guy who was brought up in this institute of sorts to basically be the good guy love interest for an important person, a future important person. He has to compete with the bad guy love interest, and essentially they're spies of sort, and the main guy ends up falling in love with the other guy instead of the girl he's supposed to be falling in love with. I wanted to love this so bad. I love the idea so much. The idea that like all the love triangles we've ever seen have just been this institution sending out their agents to make the main person fall in love. Like, I love that idea. But it just fell so flat. All the instances where we should have been watching the main character fall in love with the other guy, they just would skip over those entirely almost. The main female character had no personality and she just accepted everything with no problems whatsoever. I liked the side characters more than I liked the main characters, and they were like barely there. I just felt like there was nothing to hold on to in this book. I felt like it was a great premise that completely lacked execution. The last quarter of the book was just eye-rollingly ridiculous, and I was just disappointed in it, to say the least. Number 7 on my list was Rules of Engagement by Lily White. This is a smut book. You'll see a lot of smut books on this list because I read a lot of crappy erotica this year. Erotica can be very hit or miss, and apparently I read a lot of misses. Rules of Engagement was about this character who ends up falling for her boss, kind of, and he's a mute. The boss that she ends up falling for has, what do you call that? He's mute, but like, he can physically speak, but not, there's something emotionally going on or psychologically going on, so that he hasn't spoken in years. I hate that this is a trope now. I've seen this in like 3 different smut books and it irritates the shit out of me because the only reason it's there is for the love interest to be able to undo it. Like, oh, she fixed him because he loves her so much. And like, I hate that because like, that's not how any disability works. So that was in this. They had like so little meaningful interactions with each other. It was just like her spending a lot of time thinking. I just hated it so much. It was such a slog to get through, and I would recommend this to absolutely nobody. Number 6 on this list is another erotica called Coed by Rachel Van Dyken. I actually thought this would be higher on my list, but apparently not. This book was terrible. It was about a girl who ends up being roommates in college with 3 guys who have some sort of business where they make women feel good, except they don't make women feel good like you would think they do. They just like braid their hair and say nice things to them. It's really fucking stupid. I feel like when I read the premise to this book, I thought it was gonna be like really smutty, and then I got there and I was just like, this is the most toothless book I've ever read, because I mean, the men aren't prostitutes even though they sound like they are. There's no threesome despite the fact that there is an ample opportunity for it. I just felt very disappointed in that. The writing was silly. There was so much like over dramatic bullshit in this. The last like third of the book is just like some crazy ass soap opera. It's terrible. There's a bunch of like crazy girl crap, and I don't know. I didn't enjoy a single thing about this. It was awful, and I will never read another Rachel Van Dyken book again. Number 5 on this list is Knotted by Pam Godwin, another erotica. This book is about a couple who were high school sweethearts, but then they go through this absolutely terrible ordeal where she is raped and he is made to watch. And it's just an all-around terrible scene to read, first of all. And then it kind of jumps forward. They have no communication for years, and she comes back and he decides that like he wants to get her back or whatever. I don't know, who cares? It was insulting, the book, just like to any rape victim ever. I've read 4 Pam Godwin's books, and most of her books I find insulting in one way or another, and it's not because I don't like rough shit, because like I do, and I can deal with like taboo situations or whatever. Like the rape scene, I think for a lot of people would be really hard to get through. I was fine with it. That doesn't really bother me. In smut books, the problem is the way that the dude dealt with all the aftermath. It was just so bad. He treated her so crappily. So obviously the female character ends up with kind of PTSD from this incident, and whenever she tried to use medication or anything like that she was prescribed, he would tell her that like she doesn't need medication, and he was like such a dick about it. And then he basically decided that he was going to fix her by forcing her triggers to happen so that he could push past them, which is the most fucking ridiculous thing. And he learned all this from all these years reading shit on the internet. Like, it would have been one thing if the character was at least like, you know, I went to school in all these years we've been apart to be a psychologist. Like, no, he read some fucking shit through Google and decided that he could fix her. It was just so maddening. Like, I was so angry reading this book because every single message it sends about being a rape victim was terrible. I also felt like the author took a cop-out because there were reasons for these characters to be apart. Like I said, they went through a terrible ordeal. Like, it was an incredibly violent rape as well as there was a murder, and like, so there were emotional reasons for them to drift apart, for them to not want to be around each other or not be able to be around each other. But instead, they just went this like overly dramatic, silly-ass route where like there was some blackmail and some bullshit, and like I hate those types of storylines in erotica books, and for some reason they're super popular. Basically, just don't read this book. If you have to read a Pam Godwin book, Dark Notes is better, but honestly, like, I don't know if you should read her book unless you like some really taboo, fucked up shit. Number 4 on this list is JellO Girls by Allie Rowbottom. This book is a non-fiction book. Basically, the author's family is a part of this JellO dynasty. They created JellO, and so they've made all their money from it. This book, for me, is on this list because it just was not what I was expecting. or the synopsis talked a lot about how like JellO has ruined people's lives. So I thought it was going to talk about like how it's made people sick or something, but that's not quite what it was about. Most of the author's notes from this were from her mother, and her mother believed that there was a curse on the women in their family because of JellO, and that she was getting sick because of this curse, and she went on this weird adventure to like get people to magically cure her of her cancer and stuff, and it was just really weird, and I don't believe in any of that stuff, so for me it was not an enjoyable experience. It also had to do with like different mental illnesses and the author's own experience with her mother's issues as well as her own, and so that was kind of interesting, but for the most part I just didn't enjoy the experience, and I don't feel like I gained any knowledge about anything from it. Number 3 worst book I read this year was The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones. I thought I was going to love this book. I absolutely love horror movies, and I love when horror movies are very meta and play with like the cliches of horror, and I thought that's what this book was gonna do. It wasn't. This book was so hard to read because of the formatting of it. I can't even explain it. You have to see it for yourself because all of the paragraphs don't ever really begin or end. They just like fade off, and it's all written like scenes from a movie, but just very confusingly, like unfinished scenes from a movie. I had to listen to it on audiobook because there was no fucking way I could read it. I tried, I had the book, and I just could not get through it. The first chapter of the book, or the first scene in the book, was fantastic, and I thought, holy crap, this is gonna be great. It was so silly and ridiculous and felt like a really over-the-top movie scene, horror movie scene, and like it was just so good, but nothing in the rest of the book held up to that. Also, there was no mystery about what was gonna happen. It was very, very obvious, so there was also that. Number 2 worst book is another erotica, Rough Love by Annabel Joseph. This was really bad. This is about a girl who's a sex worker who ends up with a client who's much too rough for her, but then she like ends up having feelings for him and stuff. Her character was just so unlikable. I literally could not stand her. She was just so naive and so dumb, and it didn't, but like to the point where it didn't make any sense. Like, she would be so naive about the sex worker industry despite the fact that she had been working in it for like 7 years. I don't know, it's like that doesn't make any sense. Like, it was just like I had more information about the sex work industry than she did, despite the fact that like I haven't worked in it. I've just like read other people's experiences, and she was supposedly working in it for 7 years. I hated her. She's another one of those characters that I hate, where a dude would tell her how he feels and he would be a total dick and like be very upfront about what it was he wanted, and then she would like imbue something else in it and like feel like he was actually deep down a good person or something, and like I hate those characters. I don't know, this book was so hard to get through. I just didn't give a crap about her at all. I rolled my eyes at like every single thought she had. I actually really liked the love interest. I thought he was interesting because he was hella terrible, but like I enjoy that sometimes. Yeah, this is another author that I don't know if I would even bother giving a second chance to, because that's how bad this book was. And the number 1 worst book that I read this year, the book I hated the most, this will be a surprise to absolutely no one. It's American Gods by Neil Gaiman. This was the worst reading experience I had by far in 2019, possibly my whole life. I hated this book so much. I don't understand why people like this. Truly, what is in this book that is interesting at all? This book, I don't even know what to say this book is about. This book is about a dude who gets out of prison and someone hires him to kind of like do whatever he says, essentially, and then there's a lot of road trips around America, and that's it. I don't even know what to say about this book. The main character had no personality whatsoever. There's just absolutely nothing interesting about him. He basically just went from city to city meeting people who other people found interesting. I personally didn't find them interesting at all. But he would meet these characters, they'd have a conversation. It would usually be a stupid conversation that like I literally found so incredibly boring that I was just like, holy crap, why do I care about any of this? You're not talking about anything. And you get through that conversation and then he would move on to a different city and the same thing would happen in that place. Like, I just don't understand. And the thing was though, what kept me going was the fact that it's building and building to this big climax between all these gods. And then it just doesn't happen. This was very much like reading The Stand by Stephen King, because that was a very similar experience where it's just so fucking anticlimactic where I'm like, what the hell was the point in that? I'm so mad. Why did I waste so much time on this? Also, I didn't even read this version. I read it on my Kobo, so it was 150 pages longer than this version. I literally feel like the biggest idiot. I hate this book. I don't know why people like Neil Gaiman. I don't know if I will ever trust him again as a writer. I'm sad. But I'm happy to get rid of the book. So those were my top 10 worst books of 2019. I'm also going to be doing a most disappointing list of 2019 because to me those are two totally different things. I hope you'll come back and watch that as well. And yeah, thanks for watching.